very, very dangerous.
Get these spidey sense, I was like, oh, something's off.
And I'm just like, man, I'm waiting to hear something,
Keep that crowd warmed up. There's Mr. Jehovah Tiger.
More than 1,000 years ago, on a site in what's now the southwest corner of Illinois, an ancient people were building skyward, but without the benefit of modern engineers, steel, and glass. They used earth instead, which is why they were known as mound builders. These giant earthworks served as the foundations of what were likely some of the tallest standing structures in North America. They belonged to a mysterious and long-lost civilization known as the Mississippian culture. Their settlements once stretched from the Great Lakes region all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico and as far west as the Great Plains. But the Mississippians' largest city was here in Illinois. It's a site now known as the Cahokia Mounds. Archaeologists believe that there were once 120 mounds here, spread over 6 square miles. Building them required moving 55 million cubic feet of earth by hand in woven baskets. A fence like this one once surrounded the city, probably for protection against invaders. In the center is the largest known prehistoric earthwork in the Western Hemisphere. It's called Monk's Mound and forms the shape of a trapezoid. No one knows for sure what role these mounds played in the lives of the Mississippians, but those who were permitted to climb to the top of Monk's Mound would have looked out over a bustling city of up to 20,000 people. By the year 1250, it was more populated than the city of London. Radiating out from the center were fields and smaller villages with smaller mounds. But by 1400, the people living here were gone.
Depending upon which elder you talk to, some of our elders here say that the Smoky Mountains is where we came from, and that I guess we fell from the sky. And there are actually, I made a joke like that because some people believe, yes, that we fell from the sky. There are some people that I've met who I think they are aliens. No. Like, you're not from here. Oh, we have some in the room, huh?
I have a question.
Yes, Linda.
We see a lot of designs that are similar to the Mayan design.
Yes.
In our art.
Remember that our migration story brought us through their part of the country.
Okay.
And another key point that Linda has brought up is we have interstates, we have the internet, we are connected like this, in a hurry. Our people back then were still connected. And the reason why these sites are where they're at is because that was the mode of transportation. They were near a waterway that went from Cahokia to the Gulf, and there's archaeological evidence found at those sites. Ivory from the northwest is found there. Shells from the northeast are found there, and marine shells from Mexico are found there. Yes. Parrot feathers, yes.
I know some of our artists that do that make bows, they talk about obsidian that's from Oregon and Washington area that's found in the southeast.
Mm-hmm.
So the trade routes were very extensive.
Absolutely. And not only were they restricted to this continent, because unlike the Spanish church in the 1400s, there were people living during this time that knew that the world was not flat. Because we had people from faraway places who there's evidence here that they were here long before that.
What's going on, y'all, and welcome to yet another edition of this steamer of a podcast. Steamer. I don't know why. God, just got the heat waves coming off of it. Welcome to another edition of the Warcrypod podcast. I'm your host, Yehola Tiger, and on this episode, steamer, that's crazy. On this episode, I am going to be bringing back another part of the Giants episode. So this is like a part 2 / like a new aspect of the Giants, but I guess it is a part 2. But be talking about that. But before we do, I need you, wherever you listen to the podcast, if it's on YouTube, like, share, comment, and subscribe. Let me know. I guess this is really what I'm going to task you guys with. This is a monumental task of very small proportions. I want you guys to tell me in the comments what type of episode you guys want and what the topic is what you want the topic to be, or topics. So it could be a interview, it could be another live listener. You guys let me know. What do you guys want to hear? I'm just going to leave it up to you guys while I'm on this brief hiatus until after my kids go to school. Then I'll be easier. So let me know in the comments what type of episode you want and the contents of that episode. So if you want to hear about Bigfoot, or you want to hear about LP, or you want to hear about everything, you just do a podcast where you talk about everything. Let me know. Put it in the comments below. So to give you guys a little bit of a refresher, or you could pause the podcast, like you could pause it right here and go back. But for those of you guys who are lazy, no, I'm just kidding. I'm going to give you a little refresher regardless. So on the last episode of the Giants that I talked about, there were a lot of aspects and a lot of information that I had to get out into that so I could start branching off into specific sections of it. And I think I will do that anyways. I just wanted to give you guys a broad overview of that. The Chickasaw, or it's the history of the Chickasaw, Choctaw, and Natchez people. It's a book by, I think his name is like Harold B. something, but it's H.B. Cushman. His family was missionaries who moved into the Choctaw Nation and Chickasaw Nation and Natchez people, and were missionaries for Christianity, and began to live with these people, these native people. For 30 years, he had been collecting information and stories from these people. Now, sidebar, I also got information, and I didn't really share a lot about the Cherokee stuff as much as I wanted to. I just didn't want that episode to be so I don't like densing people out. That's really what it comes down to. But the other book that I mentioned was by James Mooney, The History or the Myths of the Cherokee People, which I will be referencing a lot more in this specific episode. So all the information I'm getting is from these two books. Also, another book called, and I'm losing my mind. It's like OVO Day. It's basically a very old Spanish journal. And it basically lines out each decade that the Spanish were in the Americas, including the Caribbean. Well, they get to the first time they ever set foot on native land, or like the Americas, and I think it was in South Carolina. So those are what I'm referencing. So if you want to go look those up, please, or if you want to know more about those, please send me a message, realwarcrypod@gmail.com, or on TikTok. I'll send you the link. So in the 1400s, and I've talked about this, the Spanish making their way through basically all of them, the Americas. They had a really good plan on how to explore as much as they humanly possibly can in the Americas. Well, they go through basically all of it, and we hear accounts from the 1400s. Well, as the decades, so 70 years goes by, and they haven't really explored massive parts of the East Coast. So there was a gentleman. His name was Captain. I think it was Captain Ayo. I can't. It's a Spanish name, but it's Aytollin. So, or no, it's anyways. I think it's I told ya. I think is how you say it. Anyways, he gets a call from the king of Spain, and he's like, "Hey, what's going on?" And he's like, "Well, I have a story to tell you." This is the craziest thing I've ever seen. You will not believe it. It's something that is like out of your realm. And he's like, what? So this captain begins to tell him this story, and the king doesn't believe it. And this is that story. In 1525, they hear, or basically they go into basically the coast of South Carolina, what is now South Carolina. And they raid an oceanside village. And they take about 70 people-ish as slaves, native people. They basically put them on the islands of Hispaniola. Geez, I'm butchering these Spanish words. They put them there. One of the slaves, they changed his name. His name is Chicara, I believe is how you say it. Or Chicara, or some Spanish name or whatever. Anyways, but they changed his name to Francisco. So Francisco, I'm going to use that name because it's the only name. It's the name that I can pronounce correctly, and I don't want to mess it up because it'll be disrespectful. So Francisco tells him, "Hey, there is a lot of minerals that you guys want here in this land, and I can show it to you, but you need to take me back home." So they're kicking it back and forth. Well, should we take this Indian home? Should we take this native guy home? Maybe he might be telling the truth. And so Captain I think it's Atoya, was like, you know what? Let's do it. So they take off. They head off. And they get to what is now South Carolina. And they pull up. And Francisco knows what's going on. He's like, hey, let me take you to our chief. The king is how these Spaniards talked about this guy. He said all the people were dark brown. But the king was black-haired and white. And he was a giant amongst everyone. And so was his wife. He looked at this giant man and was like, he must be Irish, of the people of that way. Because Irish people are very, very dark-headed. Some of them are. I don't know. I don't really know the specifics, but I have seen that type of hair. We all know it, that type of hair. So he's like, did the black Irish get here before we did? They were really kind of wondering who this guy was, who this chief was. Because he was a white, pale man, and he was gigantic. So they go and look at, they basically are studying this king, what they're calling him a king, and everyone has there's so much respect, and there's like a mutual respect amongst the tribe. He doesn't... The captain just is like, doesn't make any sense. He should be ruling over his people. He should be in control of his people, but he's not. But he's such a big statured, like he's a giant compared to these people. How is he not gaining that fear and respect? And so the captain's like, Francisco, who is this guy? He doesn't look like anybody, and he's like this way. How did he get this way? And Francisco, who's native, Chicarno, he's like, well, there's a way that he, as a baby, we have some type of medicine where we can make people bigger. And those guys are like, what? What are you talking about? Basically, like as an infant, they would roll out the child's legs to like spread out the femur bones and like the patella and all this stuff, all the leg bones, and they would stretch them out, roll them out, because the child's bone at the time, we know now, it's like malleable. It's very kind of like rubbery. Like they always say, it's hard to really break a child's bones unless you're really trying to break it. And so, that's what doctors have told me. Not saying that sounded crazy. But anyways, so that's what they're doing. They give them a certain type of medicine that makes them that way. But he kind of said it in a way where it was like unbelievable. But the weird part about it is that nobody else looked like him. That's the part of the story that I'm intrigued by, because we're in 1525 on the East Coast, like right on the coast. And if you go about 1,000 miles inward, 2,000 miles inward, whatever, thousands of miles, hundreds of miles, the Mississippi River in that coast had giants all the way up down it, protecting basically their land via the Mississippi River. And as I told it on the last episode about the Delawares saying that they wanted to cross, and then the giants, they had conflict. Well, the Choctaw did it too, and then they got the help from the Delawares and the Lenape to do that, to defeat the giants and push the giants down south to the Muskogee Creeks. Muskogee Creeks have a thing where they beat them back. They have a story about that. And then they are pushed even further south, and that's Cherokee, which would be Georgia, Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, in that kind of like a vertical stretch. And then obviously South Carolina, you have those tribes out there. And so you look at that, you hear that story, and there's an interesting thing that I'm very interested to know is if once these giants got beat back so far, did they make a plan to disperse amongst the native people and try to integrate into the native tribes? It's interesting to think of that, because that's when I read that story, I was like, is this like a, and I hate to say this, I don't want to say it, but I'm going to say it. Is this a Nephilim? Is this what the Christians be calling Nephilim? Where the fallen angels came down, basically had their own people, giants, all these, things, these offsprings of these things, they get beat back from the native people because they're outnumbered. They finally decide, well, either we go back home or we disperse amongst and try to stay alive. And it's a very interesting thought to have that. And it sounds crazy. I'm telling y'all, this sounds crazy, but these books are so fascinating because it does make a little sense, because they were finding in I think it was 1788 or something like that, when these Choctaw people, when this book started kind of making the rounds, and people in this area, Mississippi, Louisiana, and East Texas, they started talking about, hey, let's start digging some stuff up. And they started finding mammoth bones where the Choctaw said, hey, this is where our people, we had our battles with these giant mammoth type hairy things. And they were as tall as the trees. And they tell H.B. Cushman, the author of this book, hey, this is how the plains became. They said before that, the trees were as tall as possible. And we like the trees. We want the trees because it's a form of protection. So we started eliminating these mammoths, these large, hairy, elephant-looking things, which H.B. Cushman calls them mammoths. We know them now to be mammoths, but he called them mammoths in the book. Hairy elephants. So it's fascinating where we're finding out now through science that, hey, if it does make sense if the mammoths started basically tearing up the plains because they had such great numbers, because they had no predators. And when the tribes came up from Mexico and, via the Gulf of Mexico, we're avoiding all that until we run into them. And that's why the Choctaw has their legends about that. But then you also circle too, they started finding big human bones out in Texas and in different parts in that area. And so they were like, well, I think these people are kind of crazy. Well, the more journals that people are finding, and like I mentioned this on our last episode, like you don't know something till you know something. And it's just fascinating to hear in 1525, this Spanish captain was like, hey, this is what I was told. This man is a giant, but he's white. All these other people are brown. It doesn't make no sense. And the king basically goes, that's a fable. That's the brutality of the Indian. And so he was like, well, let me have the priest come in. And so they had these priests come in, and man, it was vile the way that they were talking in that journal about us natives. And I'm not really, specifically talking about Cherokees, even though Cherokees were in that area. Our origins, once we came up from basically Mexico, that's part of it. Now, as I've in the video before, when you heard this at the beginning of this episode, there are people who believe that natives who believe that we come from the stars, or we come from underground. Those are, it's all, everyone has their different things, but I think there's something to all that. But I'm just speaking in general here. I'm not speaking specifically about your people. I'm just speaking in general. But it's interesting to hear and to read this account of who is this guy? Who is this chief? He's a white man. He's pale. He's a giant. Like, what is he doing? And then so these monks, man, they were saying crazy stuff like the barbarism of these Indians and their lack of civility. But then you look at the different history, and now that we know now, they didn't know this. They're just running into these people. And it's just fascinating. But like you look at all the trade routes, and like even like Cherokee Nation has posted different things talking about the mounds, different mounds. And I've mentioned it here on the last episode that like there were mounds here before Cherokees were a thing. Like Cherokees who were pushed back and pushed down into different areas were like, there are mounds here, and the people here are saying that they are older than them. How could that be? And when they dig them up, they're finding artifacts from like all over the place. And so that becomes to get confusing. But as we know now, there was basic trade routes, because you had the Mississippi River. If you go all the way up to the Great Lakes, basically going up to the Mississippi River. If you go to the Gulf of Mexico, you go right down into Central America and where the Mayans were. And so you start finding, and like I said, they mentioned this in the video earlier. We're finding those things. Like we're finding runes from Vikings up in Minnesota and in the Great Lakes area, because that funnels so basically from the Gulf of Mexico up the Mississippi, you travel by, tributaries, and who knows, the Mississippi River could have been way bigger. It could have been more vast and had more tributaries. But then you go all the way up to the Great Lakes. Well, the Great Lakes are connected, and you can get all the way to Greenland. Easy. That's not that hard of a trek if you know what you're doing. And the Vikings knew that. Those Nordic people, they knew that. And so the tribes already knew who white people were before white people were here. And I think that's something that I think is missing out a lot of key history, is I think that we already knew who white people were these people that didn't look like us and they were lighter than us. Like they knew, they're okay, this is them, but then it wasn't them. It was someone else. And we know how things go. But what's fascinating too is like when I move over to the more kind of referencing the myths of the Cherokee people, my people, we've always had a grasp on what's happening, because we never wanted to disappear. And that's much like a lot of tribes and a lot of different nations. And growing up in Tahlequah, it's very evident, like they want their staple on everything. And we want you to know who we are. Because it's, this is Cherokee Nation Reservation, you're living here, but still this is what we want you to know. And in this book, it's very interesting. James Mooney is talking to a man named Swimmer, in which we have swimmers are throughout Tahlequah and all over Cherokee Nation. And this is like 1700s ish. Talking to a man named Swimmer, and he was asking him about a story that he had kind of heard, and he was like, "Hey, you guys told a story about the giants, and so I want to make a correction here too. They're so similar in the way that we Cherokee people were calling them back then, but I called them moon-eyed people in the first one. They are not the people. They weren't the moon-eyed people. They were the slanted-eyed people. So I apologize. I guess after the fact, and there's a moon-eyed people that the legend is that that's why we're told to stay near the fire and stay near the light at night. But the slanted-eyed people were said that they couldn't see at night, or they couldn't see during the day very well. And so they always came out at night. I'll have to do more on the moon-eyed people. And maybe if you want something more like that, let me know. But so there's this story that was passed down through a lot of different people. And at the time in the 1700s, when this man is getting this information, or the early 1800s, this man Swimmer was told by his grandmother, who was in the mid 1700s, was when she was a young girl. So his grandmother was telling him that there was an older woman, a grandmother, who had this granddaughter, and she was to be married to the best hunter in the village. And the grandmother was like, well, I'm going to find you someone, and I need you to, marry so you can, stay healthy, stay, alive, because it's not like now. Can't go to a grocery store. So one night, real late, the girl is woken up by somebody, and she sees a giant. And he's talking to her. He kind of starts swooning her. Hey, I have this game for you. Your grandmother mentioned that you needed someone who is a good hunter. Well, I'm a great hunter. I know these lands very well. And so this began to become a recurring thing. Grandmother said, well, I would like to meet your husband. And so I would like to, if he could bring us some firewood as a gift, I would love to meet him. And so grandmother is like, going to sleep. And the next day he comes back. It's giant. And she's like, or slanted-eyed person. And she was like, hey, my grandmother wants to see you. He's like, I already know. It's already here. He had brought basically a whole tree as a gift to the grandmother so that he could get in her good graces. Because the girl that was with this giant started to realize that he could read minds, that he knew what she was thinking. So she was like, well, she doesn't thank you, that's what we want. But I want you to meet her. He's like, well, maybe, I just don't want to scare her. He's like, I can be very scary. So next morning happens, grandmother wakes up and she's like, oh my gosh, what is this tree doing here? And she was like, well, my husband brought you a gift. She said, I don't want a full tree. I need it cut up. What am I going to do with a full tree? And being in mind, guys, this tree is like big, is how they describe it. So grandmother was like, well, I want him to get the trees out of here, but we need more meat. So this happens again. He brings the same thing that the grandmother asked for. Be in mind, guys, this giant is nowhere near them. He's miles away, but he knows what the grandmother wants. So finally, he ends up meeting the grandmother. The grandmother was scared. The brother comes over from the next village over, and he comes in from his travels, and she's telling her, hey, I have a husband now. I really want you to meet him. And so the brother's asleep, grandmother's asleep, and so the giant comes back to his wife and is like, well, I just need you guys to not, I don't want you to be scared of me. So they end up going off to wherever the giant lives. And so the brother wakes up and comes around, and he's like, hey, where did she go? Oh, she went with her husband. She just had a baby. And the guy was like, what? So he kind of follows the blood trail, and he follows the giant's footsteps. And he follows them all the way to this mountainside. And he could tell that, like, this baby was like a bigger baby. Because the way that she said that the birth happened, and there was too much blood, there was just a lot of blood. And he could see the indentions of this baby walking to wherever they were walking. So he shows up at this kind of mountainside. And he looks up and he's looking around. He can see a very big kind of a door. And it's not real noticeable, but he's really looking for it. So he found it. He can hear in the background drumming. And it sounded like people were dancing. And all of a sudden he says, he kind of said something, and then they stopped drumming. And his sister comes out with his baby and says, hey, this is what needs to happen for you to meet my husband. You need to fast for 7 days. And on that 7th day, when everyone is around, no one needs to do a war cry. Everyone needs to just be calm. And he will show up. So the 7 days pass. Everyone does what they need to do. And all the villages from different villages are there. And the giant shows up. And everybody in the village is like scared. They don't know what to do. They're kind of frozen. All of a sudden, one of the warriors from a different village started calling up the war cry, and everybody else starts war crying, and the giant takes off. And so he chases after him, and his sister's with him, and he comes back and he opens a thing, or he kind of comes back and they open the door, and he says, well, you guys, you disrespected me. I asked you to fast for 7 days and not war cry on me, not to make war with me. And you were beginning to make war with me. And the brother was just like, well, okay, I'm sorry, we'll do it again. So they do it again. They do it successfully, and they're able to enter into this almost like a lair. And what he notices is very big townhouses, like long houses that we'd see native people having. But they're in this mountain. And basically that's kind of how it ends, is that's the giants that they're talking about, those slanted-eyed people, then they live in the mountains. When I read that story, if you guys remember, the guy who passed away in a mysterious manner, who was out in the Pacific Northwest, caught what looked like a very large human being on the top of that mountain, my mind connected those dots. Because in the first episode, if you guys remember, I talked about how there were a lot of missing cases of people going missing. That didn't make sense. Missing people. Anyways, there are missing people out in a mountain out in North Carolina around a military base. Is that a coincidence? Because this story takes place in that area in those old days. That guy who saw that giant on the mountain, there is a military base near that. Obviously, it's on the West Coast, so you gotta have something. Is it a coincidence? Maybe, maybe so. Conspiracy me is like, oh, that's a little weird. Because why would they begin to try to take away, and this is where I'm getting into the conspiracy of why these source materials are harder to find is kind of what I'm talking about. Because it took me a while to find the full text of this book. Like I can find different excerpts in different places, but I can't find the full thing, and it took me a while to find the full thing. And then I've read it. It's harder to find these things. It's harder to find those pictures of these skeletons that these old miners were finding out on the West Coast, out west. There's something to it. And maybe I'm on the right track. And if I'm on the right track, I'm not, suicidal or anything. But there's just something interesting about that, because one thing that I've been reading a lot about when it comes to these mounds, that people in the scientific community, how I say this, they want native people to be like, hey, these people were very smart, and that it's racism or whatever, that you guys are like these pseudoscientist guys, people who talk about the Nephilim and all this stuff, that these natives were not smart enough to be able to create these mounds. But I don't think they understand. They're doing it's a projection thing. They're doing the exact same thing, because why is nobody talking about James Mooney and H.B. Cushman talking about giants and having stories of giants and people knowing what these things are? And it's just like nothing's ever told. All we see is people just doing giants in America, and it's the AI comes up with no source material. When I went to search this for the first time just to see what I could find, all it came up was like Facebook posts, like AI YouTube, like no source material. And it took, so I started having to basically, where did this AI video get this? And so I'd watch these stupid AI videos, and then I found, okay, all right, it's from this. Okay, H.B. Cushman. Okay, well, who is that? Oh, he was a historian who basically was a missionary for the Chickasaw. He was a missionary in the Chickasaw, Choctaw, and Natchez people all down the Mississippi. He had different churches in these communities. Oh, he wrote a book. And I had to read hundreds and hundreds of pages to find what I'm looking for. And that's what I found. It's exhausting. And it's not exhausting to read it. It's exhausting to have to go through multiple layers to try to find what the Choctaw people said, what my people said. Because it sounds crazy. Yet, people are starting to come around on Bigfoot. They're finally starting to come around on LP. Because they're starting to realize that LP is everywhere. It's in Scotland. It's in the Irish or the British Isles. The Irish had them. The leprechaun, like fae, fairies, the jinn, like in Arab culture, like these things are everywhere. And giants, I think we're here. Because what's fascinating about it is that there were battles between mammoths and giants. I need to source this, but I read that somewhere, and I can't remember where I read it, so you take it with a grain of salt. This is for entertainment purposes only. No. But they did have battles. They had clashes. And I think that was the only... once the natives beat back the giants, the mammoths then ran roughshod. And when I was thinking about when the guy, I think his name was Andrew, when he shot that giant person on that mountain. It makes sense now when Cherokees talk about, my ancestors or our ancestors talk about, or they talk about these giants went up into the sky, or they went up home. Up can be a mountain, you know? It didn't click until I read this story. It didn't fully click until I fully read the story and the details of the story and how this brother went to go see his sister and he had to look up and he could see them dancing up there on this big mountain that, like, you know, he would look like a pebble to them. It's just so fascinating stuff. And I want to keep pushing on it. I'm going to take a few breaks. I'll probably pick it back up at the end of the year. But, like, we still hadn't even touched on what the Eskimo and Inuit and Viking people, what their legends are about this. Because they already knew, the natives here already knew these people, the Eskimo, because they called them the raw fish eating people. And they called the Vikings basically, like, they weren't giants, but they just called them, you know, big people. And we have been finding runes all over the place. And it's starting to be revealed that it wasn't so like, hey, just the natives were here. I think there was a line of communication between empires. And there were modes of travel that I think Europeans destroyed for a reason. What that reason is, who knows? Well, we may know, but somebody knows. But there's just so much because now, you know, they have found, like, I know, I don't want to get into this on this episode, but like the black people saying that they've been here. I think just like the Vikings and just like the Asiatic people, they came here via travel and they traded, because then the example was in there that, like in the video before, like, yeah, they're finding different artifacts here. Like, oh, hey, this is a rune tablet. This says this. It gives you good luck. Keep it on your door. And so then once, you know, everything erodes, they find that stone, which stone is, you know, forever, just about, dang near almost just about. That's specifically only in Greenland. So history's not what it is, and history's in books. I'm learning that more and more every time I find a book about something. Because word of mouth, we start to forget things a little bit. But it's just very interesting. These old stories, they do talk about LP in these. And I may have to do a little mini episode about that, because they talk about them in great length. And they call them fairies. And it's just very interesting to see how, like, these people are, you know, these Christian missionaries who are just demons, angels, you know, they're not thinking about nothing like that. And they think they know the land. And they run into natives who have been here thousands of years. And, like, another thing about these books that I found so interesting, I said this in the first episode, is that it reiterates the Indian time. Where time is not what it is. Like, time is not, hey, it's 2:00 in the afternoon. Time is what it is, just where we are now. And years aren't really years, if you think about it. Like, with natives back in the day, they would say, like, 7 chiefs ago. Well, that chief could have lived 50 years. That could be 400 years ago. But they have that passed down, that knowledge is passed down from each chief. And then, you know, dispersed into the community so people know. And those days are kind of over, but they're kind of not, because there's still people like myself, Lodge Tales, Res Scares, Don't Whisper at Night, those guys over there, Navajo guys, what's the other guy now? I can't think of his name right now, but I'm even he was on the Kyle Hill. He was on the listener episode. He's trying to find stories because these stories are still out here and they're in remnants. They're in just pieces, and that's why I'm always trying to be like, all right, well, this is why I share this on TikTok, because there's going to be someone who can fit the piece of whatever story that I know. The information I'm missing out of this story, someone else may have it. And that's a lot of where I get, I start getting that information. People are like, dang, how you be piecing this together? It's like, because I've had 7 people tell me this, and then one person or a couple people told me this, and then 5 people told me that, and then now I'm like, oh, this is the full story. But it's all fragmented out. And I think that's on purpose. But I guess we'll really truly never know, but this is Giants Part 2. Like I said, I'm going to be going on about a month, 2 month and a half hiatus. I'm pondering on if I'm going to start doing interviews with people, because I want to make sure Halloween is really good this year. Like it was 2 years ago. I had like 9 people on. I had like 11 or 12 interviews for Halloween just in the month. So I had like 11 episodes. And so I want to do that again. That was a lot of fun. A lot of spooky stuff going on. But if you are someone who is willing, who wants to, maybe come on, tell a few stories. And if you just want to tell a few stories or just send me stories of just you talking and telling your stories, you can do that too as well. I don't have no qualms with that. Especially if you just want to be like, hey, I don't really want to come on, but I want to share my story and I want to share it. We can do that too, because I've had different people, be like, hey, I just have so many stories that I just haven't told, and that I'm not really holding. I feel like I just don't have enough time to tell them. Like there's about 25 stories, 30, 40 stories, maybe at most, that I have gotten from people that I haven't told. Just because I just get busy in my life. But if you're someone who wants to come on a podcast and you want to be a guest, send me an email, realwarcrypod@gmail.com. Send me what you want to talk about or what stories you have. And like I said, it doesn't have to be a full story. I can add you in like I have with other stories into the podcast while I'm talking about other stuff. It can be done. Anything's possible. But just like I said, let me know. TikTok, warcrypod. I was laughing on there the other day. So I was putting in what is it? Casey's Pizza, where you have to, you get it from the store and you got to cook it. Not Casey's. Papa Murphy's. And I'm just bebopping along. I left my phone open. I was in the middle of watching a PBS video. I'm weird, y'all. I like watching stuff like that. But I was watching something about something, and all of a sudden, I get done. I come back in here, and it says your account has been deactivated, or your account has been banned. And like it kind of lagged for a minute, and I hit OK, and it lagged, and then it kicked me back into like the login. So then I went to log back in, and everything was fine. I don't know what happened, but I do know what happened. While I was doing that, my child was on live for like 3 minutes, butt naked on there. So they hit me with a violation. So I'm almost cooked on TikTok. But if you want to follow me over there, warcrypod. If you want to send me a story, you just want to, you got a point you want to talk about, realwarcrypod@gmail.com. I've had a few people reach out, with very kind words, and I do appreciate it. I'm trying to think what else. YouTube, if you're a NCAA football person, if you play video games, Warcry Gaming is on YouTube. I'm on TikTok too as well, if you want to follow me over there. If you're that guy, if you're that person or that gal, if you're someone who's into that. I am. It keeps my mind. My mind is always just rolling. It's just always rolling. And when I play video games, I can just shut it off. My mind doesn't keep going. So it's like a pressure release valve that I try to hit. But other than that, guys, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you. I've had, like I said, I've had a bunch, not a bunch, but a few people reach out and be like, man, I really appreciate you, this, and this. And I can't tell you how much that means to me, because sometimes I don't really know if this podcast is reaching anybody. I don't know if anyone's not changing, but just kind of thinking about things a little bit different. You know, I just don't know until people tell me. So it is appreciated. But as for the podcast, we're going to keep rolling. We're going to gear up for Halloween. We got a bunch of stuff going on for that. So I'm excited. I'm ready, and I hope you are too. As for me, and as for this episode, we're cooked. We're done. I appreciate you, and I'm going to catch you on the next one.